There are places we swear we'll never return to, places where we left part of our blood and part of our soul. But sometimes, fate has other plans. I'm going to tell you the story of Pearl Carter and Samara Hayes, an art restorer who returned to the hospital where she almost died, and the doctor who saved her life 7 years ago, keeping a secret that could destroy them both. Pearl came back to San Francisco General forced by a job, restoring a Diego Rivera mural hidden in the basement. Every hallway brought back fragmented memories of that night, the smell of disinfectant, the cold, the certainty that she would never wake up again. But what she didn't expect was to find her. Samara, the woman who held her hand when everything was fading away. And when their eyes met after 7 years, Pearl felt the air grow thick. There was something in Samara's eyes, something that looked like guilt, something that looked like fear, and something deeper that neither of them dared to name. Because that night, Samara made a decision that changed Pearl's destiny, a decision no one else knows about, a truth buried in medical records that now threatens to come to light. This is not just a story about a reunion. It's a story about secrets that save lives, and loves that are born where you least expect them. Stay with me until the end to discover this story. The bloodstain had been scrubbed clean years ago, but Pearl Carter could still see it spreading across the white linoleum floor under the harsh fluorescent lights. Every step she took down the corridor of San Francisco General Hospital echoed that night. The metallic taste in her mouth, the cold that froze her hands, the certainty that she'd never see another sunrise. 7 years later, she was back in the same place where she'd waited for death, and the smell of disinfectant churned her stomach as if time had stood still. "Ms. Carter?" A voice behind her was firm, but Pearl didn't turn immediately. She gripped her leather portfolio tighter, feeling her knuckles go white. "Dr. Morrison is waiting for you in the conference room." Pearl took a deep breath before turning. It was a young nurse in a crisp uniform with curious eyes. She didn't know her. That was good. No one here should remember the woman who'd been rushed in on a stretcher that October morning in 2017, bleeding out from a wound the official reports never fully explained. "Thank you," Pearl murmured, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She walked down the main corridor of the hospital, a Victorian-era building renovated in the 1960s for modern medical services. The original brick walls contrasted with updated tile floors, worn down by decades of urgent footsteps. There was something distinctly San Franciscan about this place, the blend of history and functionality, beauty and pain. That's precisely why they'd called her. Pearl Carter was one of the Bay Area's finest art conservators, specializing in historical murals and WPA-era frescoes. The hospital housed a hidden treasure, a Diego Rivera mural that had been covered during renovations in the 80s and recently rediscovered after a water leak. But when she'd received the call 3 weeks ago, her first instinct had been to hang up. Returning to this hospital meant confronting memories she'd buried deep for years. It meant reliving the fear, the confusion, and something more dangerous, the unanswered question that had haunted her ever since. What really happened that night? The conference room was at the end of the hallway, next to the administrative wing. Pearl knocked and entered without waiting for a response. Inside, 3 men and 1 woman were reviewing documents spread across a long oak table. The director, a man in his 50s with thick-rimmed glasses, looked up and smiled broadly. "Ms. Carter, so glad you're here." He stood and extended his hand. "I'm Dr. James Morrison, hospital director. These are my colleagues from the preservation department and the architect overseeing the renovation." Pearl shook hands and nodded politely while her mind registered every detail of the room. The windows overlooked the internal courtyard, where a jacaranda tree dropped purple flowers onto the covered walkways. She could see the emergency wing from here, the same entrance where she'd arrived by ambulance. "I understand the project is urgent," Pearl said, pulling her tablet from her portfolio. "You sent me preliminary photos of the mural, but I need to see it in person to assess the deterioration level." "Of course," Dr. Morrison replied. "The mural is in the basement, in what used to be the hospital's original morgue. It was closed in the 90s and converted to dead storage. The water damage destroyed several old documents, but also revealed the artwork we'd been searching for. Rivera painted it in 1952 during a medical stay here." The word morgue made something twist in Pearl's stomach. She wasn't superstitious, but there was something deeply unsettling about working underground, surrounded by death records. "When can I start?" she asked, keeping her voice professional. "Right now, if you'd like." The director checked his watch. "Security has the morning shift covered, so you'll have full access. However," he paused, as if measuring his words, "I should warn you that the basement facilities share space with the night shift medical staff break area. You might hear movement or encounter doctors and nurses during their shifts." Something about the way he said it sent a chill down Pearl's spine. It wasn't just a logistical warning. There was something more. "I understand," she responded, closing her tablet. "That won't be a problem." Dr. Morrison nodded and pressed a button on his intercom. "Ellen, please call Dr. Hayes to escort Ms. Carter to the basement. She's the chief of internal medicine and knows the area well." The surname hit Pearl like a punch to the chest. Hayes. It couldn't be. There were thousands of Hayes in America. It was one of the most common surnames. It meant nothing. It didn't mean it was her. But when the conference room door opened 5 minutes later, Pearl knew fate had a cruel sense of humor. Samara Hayes walked into the room like silent lightning. She wore a white coat over dark jeans, her chestnut hair pulled back in a low ponytail, and carried a stethoscope around her neck like another accessory. Her eyes, the color of dark honey, met Pearl's for a fraction of a second before shifting toward the director. "Sorry for the delay, Dr. Morrison," Samara said in a controlled voice. "I had an emergency on the 3rd floor." "No problem, Doctor. Let me introduce you to Pearl Carter, the conservator who'll be handling the Rivera mural." Samara slowly turned toward Pearl, and there was something rehearsed in that movement, as if she'd been preparing for this moment. Their eyes met again, and this time they didn't look away. "Pleasure to meet you," Samara said, extending her hand. Pearl hesitated for just a second before taking it. The contact was brief, formal, but enough for an electric current to run through her arm. Samara's skin was still soft, her fingers firm and warm. Pearl remembered those hands. She remembered them holding her forehead while she vomited blood. She remembered them pressing against her wrist, counting heartbeats that were growing slower. She remembered them stroking her hair in a gesture that shouldn't have existed between doctor and patient. "Pleasure to meet you," Pearl responded, withdrawing her hand faster than necessary. "Subscribe now. YouTube prioritizes subscribers, and those who aren't subscribed miss out on future stories." Samara cleared her throat and addressed the director. "Should I take her to the basement then?" "Please, and make sure she has full access. The project has administrative priority." Pearl gathered her things and followed Samara out of the conference room. They walked in silence down the hallway, their steps synchronized in an unsettling way. It was Samara who broke the silence when they reached the elevator. "I didn't think you'd come back," she said quietly, pressing the basement button. Pearl kept her eyes fixed on the descending numbers. "I didn't think you'd still be working here. I never left." The doors opened with a metallic hiss, and they entered the small space. The air was colder, denser. Samara pressed the button marked B, and the elevator began its descent with a dull noise. "Do you recognize this hospital?" Samara asked, looking straight ahead. "Every inch of it," Pearl replied, her voice rougher than intended. Some places you don't forget, no matter how hard you try. Samara nodded slowly. There are things you never forget, even after 7 years. The elevator stopped with a gentle jolt, and the doors opened to a dimly lit corridor. The smell was different down here, less disinfectant, more moisture and old paper. The walls were gray concrete with exposed pipes running along the ceiling. Some bulbs flickered, creating shadows that moved like ghosts. Samara walked ahead, guiding her through the underground labyrinth. They passed closed doors with rusty plaques. Archives 1970-1985, obsolete equipment storage, machine room. At the end of the corridor, a double metal door with tinted glass windows had a new plaque. Conservation room, restricted access. Samara pulled out an electronic card and swiped it through the reader. The door clicked open, revealing a spacious room illuminated with temporary work lamps. The mural occupied the entire north wall, an explosion of ochre, red, and black colors depicting industrial workers in Rivera's characteristic style. Dynamic figures, impossible angles, faces distorted by perspective. It was beautiful and disturbing at once, but Pearl barely looked at it. Her attention was fixed on Samara, who had closed the door behind them and was now watching her with an intensity that made the air feel heavier. "Why did you accept the project?" Samara asked. "When I saw your name on the proposed conservators list, I thought you'd turn it down." Pearl set her portfolio on a folding table and pulled out her photography equipment. "I needed the work, and I wasn't going to let the past stop me from doing my job." "Nothing else?" Samara's voice had a challenging tone. Pearl turned toward her, crossing her arms. What else could there be? Samara took a step forward, and Pearl noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the small wrinkles at the corners that hadn't been there 7 years ago. Life had marked Samara too. "Answers," Samara said. "I thought maybe you were coming looking for answers." "I don't care about answers anymore," Pearl lied. "I just want to restore the mural and get out of here." Samara studied her in silence, as if she could read every lie written on her face. Finally, she nodded and headed toward the door. "I'll be on the second floor if you need anything. My shift ends at 3 in the afternoon, but I come back at 11 at night for the night shift." "I won't need anything," Pearl replied. Samara stopped at the threshold, her hand on the doorframe. She didn't turn to speak, as if the words were easier without eye contact. "Pearl, I'm glad you're alive." And before Pearl could respond, Samara was gone, leaving her alone in the basement with a 70-year-old mural and a past that weighed like lead in her lungs. Pearl stood motionless for a long moment, listening to the echo of Samara's footsteps fade down the hallway. Then, slowly, she approached the mural. She ran her fingers over the rough surface, feeling the cracks where moisture had done its work. She'd come here to restore art, she told herself. Not to confront ghosts, not to open wounds that had taken years to close. But as she observed the twisted figures in Rivera's mural, all struggling, all trapped in eternal motion, she knew that lying to herself was no longer an option. She had come for answers, and now that she'd seen Samara again, now that she'd felt that warm, firm hand touching hers, she knew she couldn't leave until she found them, even if those answers destroyed her. The first day of work passed in almost meditative silence. Pearl photographed every inch of the mural from multiple angles, documenting the deterioration level, areas where moisture had peeled away pigment layers, cracks threatening to expand. She worked methodically, letting professional routine keep her focused, away from thoughts threatening to invade her mind. But it was impossible to completely ignore her surroundings. Every hour she heard footsteps in the hallway, muffled voices, the screech of the elevator. The hospital breathed around her, a living organism full of pain and hope. And somewhere on those upper floors, Samara was treating patients, making life or death decisions, carrying responsibilities Pearl could barely imagine. Did Samara think about her too? Or had that encounter been just a professional formality, an awkward moment that would soon be forgotten? At 3:30 in the afternoon, Pearl decided to take a break. She went up to the first floor and found the hospital cafeteria, a small space with formica tables and a counter selling watery coffee and plastic-wrapped sandwiches. She bought black coffee and sat by the window, watching the hospital's movement. Doctors in white coats talked in groups. Nurses checked tablets while walking. Patients' families waited with anxious expressions in the hallways. Life and death coexisted here in a delicate balance, separated only by correct or wrong decisions, by seconds that made the difference between an ending and a beginning. Pearl remembered being on the other side. She remembered the urgency, the pain burning her abdomen, the sensation of her body emptying of all vital substance. She remembered blurred faces leaning over her, voices giving orders she didn't understand, hands moving her from stretcher to stretcher, and then, amid the chaos, a presence that stayed when everyone else left. A hand that held hers for hours, a voice that whispered words that shouldn't exist between strangers. "Don't go. Please don't go." Those words had been the last thing she heard before losing consciousness. And when she woke 3 days later in a private room with tubes connected to every part of her body, Samara was there, sitting in a chair by the window, her head resting against the wall, asleep in what looked like an uncomfortable position, as if she'd been there all night, as if she'd been there every night. But when Samara woke and their eyes met, something changed. The forced intimacy of that early morning evaporated, replaced by a professional distance that hurt more than any physical wound. Samara became Dr. Hayes, attending her recovery with clinical efficiency, explaining procedures, adjusting medications, but never touching her hand that way again. As if that night had been a dream, or a mistake. Pearl finished her coffee, which had already gone cold, and returned to the basement. She spent the rest of the afternoon doing pigment tests, taking samples to analyze in her lab. She'd need at least 2 weeks to complete the restoration, maybe 3. 2 weeks working meters away from Samara. 2 weeks breathing the same air, sharing the same space, pretending the past didn't exist. At 7 in the evening, while packing her tools, she heard the elevator hiss. Instinctively, she looked toward the door, expecting to see Samara. But it was a security guard, an older man in a blue uniform. "Excuse me, miss," he said in a friendly tone. "They're closing non-essential areas in half an hour. Will you be staying much longer?" "No, I'm leaving now," Pearl replied, closing her tool case. "I'll be back tomorrow morning." The guard nodded and left. Pearl took one last look at the mural before turning off the work lamps. In the semi-darkness, Rivera's figures seemed to move, trapped in their eternal struggle. There was something prophetic in that image, she thought. Everyone fighting, no one really winning. She left the basement and took the elevator to the main lobby. The night hospital was different from the day one. Quieter, darker, with empty hallways that amplified every sound. Pearl walked toward the exit, but when passing the emergency area, she stopped. There it was, the entrance where she'd arrived that night. The same access ramp, the same automatic glass doors, now glowing under the orange parking lot lights. Pearl felt her breathing quicken for no apparent reason. There was no danger here, no blood or pain. It was just a door, but her body remembered. Her body knew that crossing that door that night had been crossing a threshold between life and death, and that someone, against all odds, had brought her back. "Are you okay?" Pearl spun around sharply. Samara was behind her, now dressed in street clothes, a gray sweater and jeans. She carried a backpack over her shoulder and car keys in her hand. Her shift had ended. "Yes," Pearl lied. Just observing. Samara approached slowly, the way you'd approach an injured animal. Do you remember when you arrived? Pearl shook her head. Only fragments, nothing clear. You arrived by ambulance at 2:40 in the morning, Samara said, her voice taking on that clinical tone Pearl had learned to hate. Penetrating abdominal trauma, severe internal hemorrhage, blood pressure in free fall. They gave you 15 minutes to live when you crossed that door. Why are you telling me this? Pearl asked, feeling the old fear return. Because you need to know it, Samara replied. You need to know it wasn't luck that kept you alive. It was decisions I made, decisions that... She paused, closing her eyes for a moment. Decisions I shouldn't have made. Pearl felt her heart beat faster. What are you talking about? But Samara was already backing away, shaking her head as if she'd said too much. Nothing. Forget it. Just take care of yourself, Pearl. And if you need anything during the nights, I'm on the second floor. Shift from 11 to 7. Before Pearl could respond, Samara turned and walked toward the parking lot, disappearing into the night's darkness. Pearl stood there in the hospital lobby with the echo of those words resonating in her mind. Decisions I shouldn't have made. What did that mean? What had Samara done that night? And for the first time in 7 years, Pearl felt something stronger than fear or confusion. She felt determination. She wasn't going to let Samara hide behind enigmatic words and professional distance. If there was a secret, she'd discover it. If there was a hidden truth, she'd find it. Even if it meant confronting the only person who'd saved her life, and possibly broken her heart without her even knowing it. The following days fell into a tense routine. Pearl arrived at the hospital at 8 in the morning, went down to the basement, and immersed herself in the restoration work. Rivera's mural revealed secrets in layers. Under the dirt and mold, the original colors shone with renewed intensity. Pearl worked with infinite patience, using fine brushes and specialized chemical solutions to restore life to every inch. It was work that required absolute concentration, and she clung to it like a lifeline. But concentration broke every time she heard the elevator, every time footsteps echoed in the hallway, every time the basement door opened, even if it was just the security guard or a maintenance technician. Every fiber of her being was alert, waiting, fearing, and longing in equal measure for the moment when Samara would appear. But Samara didn't appear, at least not during the day. According to what the security guard had told her, Dr. Hayes had changed her schedule and now only worked night shifts. It was evident she was avoiding Pearl, as much as Pearl pretended to avoid her. On Thursday afternoon, while cleaning a particularly damaged section of the mural, Pearl heard voices in the hallway. They weren't the usual voices of medical staff. These were younger, more casual. She approached the door and opened it slightly. 2 young women, both in nursing uniforms, were walking toward the staff break area at the end of the corridor. They were talking loudly, oblivious to any presence. "I don't know how she does it," one of them was saying, a slim girl with her hair in a bun. "She's been sleeping barely 3 or 4 hours a day for like 5 years." "It's because she practically lives here," the other replied, a taller woman with glasses. "I heard that since that thing happened with the patient, Dr. Hayes became obsessed with never making mistakes again. It's like she's afraid to go home." "Which patient? The one from years ago?" "Yeah, the one who almost died in the ER. Nobody talks about it, but I was doing my internship here when it happened. There was a problem with the file, something weird with the diagnosis. The doctor got in trouble with the ethics committee." Pearl felt her pulse quicken. She moved closer to the door, holding her breath. "And what happened?" asked the younger nurse. "I don't know for sure. but they say Dr. Hayes altered something in the medical reports. There was never a formal investigation because the patient survived. But since then, she changed. She became more closed off, more obsessive about her work, like she's atoning for something. The voices faded as they entered the break area, and Pearl slowly closed the door, leaning against it. Her mind was processing the information at breakneck speed. Altered something in the medical reports. What kind of alteration? Why? And why had no one investigated? She remembered Samara's words in the lobby. Decisions I shouldn't have made. Now those words had a completely different weight. They weren't just words from a doctor reflecting on a difficult case. They were a confession. Pearl spent the rest of the day in barely contained agitation. She tried to focus on the mural, but her hands trembled slightly every time she held a brush. At 7 p.m, when she should have left, she made a decision. She'd stay. She'd wait for Samara to arrive for her night shift. And this time, she wouldn't accept evasions. She settled into the restoration room, pretending to work, but really listening to every sound in the hallway. At 10:30, the hospital transformed. The daytime bustle gave way to spectral silence, interrupted only by the occasional sounds of medicine carts, distant alarms, and whispered voices. At 11 o'clock sharp, she heard the elevator. Pearl stepped into the hallway just in time to see Samara emerging from the metal doors. She wore her white coat over dark jeans and a blue shirt, carrying a cup of coffee in her hand. When she saw Pearl, she stopped abruptly, the dark liquid threatening to spill. "You're still here," Samara said, and there was something in her voice, a mix of surprise and resignation. "We need to talk," Pearl replied, crossing her arms. Samara looked down the empty hallway, as if calculating her escape options, but finally nodded. "Come to my office." Pearl followed her through a maze of hallways until they reached an unmarked door on the second floor. Samara opened it with her access card, revealing a small but functional space. A desk cluttered with piles of files, a bookshelf packed with medical texts, 2 folding chairs, and a window overlooking the internal courtyard illuminated by security lamps. "Sit," Samara said, closing the door behind them. Pearl sat in one of the chairs, watching as Samara set her coffee on the desk and leaned against the windowsill. The tension between them was palpable, like electricity before a storm. "What did you do that night?" Pearl asked without preamble. "The nurses say you altered my medical file. Is it true?" Samara closed her eyes, and when she opened them, there was a vulnerability in them that Pearl hadn't seen before. "You were eavesdropping?" "I wasn't hiding. They were talking loudly in my hallway." Pearl leaned forward. "Answer the question. What did you do?" Samara took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Your admission diagnosis was abdominal trauma with internal hemorrhage. The studies showed you needed immediate surgery to stop the bleeding. But when I arrived at the ER that night..." She paused, her hands clenching into fists. "There were discrepancies. The vital signs didn't match the reported trauma level. Your blood pressure was low, but not low enough to justify the emergency surgery protocol." "I don't understand," Pearl said, frustrated. "Explain it in normal words." "It means someone exaggerated the severity of your condition in the initial report. And when I reviewed your actual studies, I realized you didn't need emergency surgery. You needed observation and conservative treatment. But if I officially reported that..." "What?" Pearl pressed. "The ER doctor who treated you first was Dr. Marcus Green, one of the hospital's most respected surgeons." Samara stepped away from the window and started pacing in small circles. "He'd made the decision to operate immediately, based on the initial report. If I publicly contradicted him, if I presented evidence that the diagnosis was wrong, Dr. Green would have lost his reputation, maybe his license." "And what did you do?" I altered your file, Samara admitted, her voice barely a whisper. I adjusted the numbers to match Dr. Green's diagnosis, but privately, I treated you according to what you actually needed. I convinced Dr. Green to delay the surgery, arguing we needed to stabilize you first. During those hours, I implemented a conservative treatment protocol that worked. The hemorrhage stopped on its own. And by morning, you didn't need surgery anymore. The silence that followed was dense, heavy. Pearl tried to process what she'd just heard. Samara had lied. She'd altered medical records. She'd committed a serious violation of professional ethics. But by doing so, she'd saved her life. Why? Pearl finally asked. You didn't know me. I was just another patient. Why risk your career for me? Samara turned to look at her directly, and in her eyes was something raw, something she'd been hiding for 7 years. Because from the moment I saw you come into the ER, with blood on your clothes and fear in your eyes, I knew I couldn't let you go. I can't explain it. It wasn't professional. It wasn't logical. But when I took your hand and felt your pulse weakening, something inside me broke. And I decided I'd do whatever it took to keep you alive, even if it meant lying. Pearl slowly stood up, her heart beating so hard she could hear it in her ears. Are you telling me you cared? That a complete stranger mattered to you enough to risk everything? Yes, Samara answered simply. And after, when you survived, when you recovered and left the hospital, I tried to forget you. I tried to convince myself it had just been the adrenaline of the moment, that any doctor would have done the same. But I couldn't. For 7 years, I thought about you every day. I wondered where you were, if you were happy, if you remembered anything from that night. If this doesn't deserve a like, I don't know what does. Pearl moved closer to Samara, closing the distance between them. And now? Now that I'm here, what am I supposed to do with this information? I don't know, Samara admitted, her voice breaking slightly. You can report me. You can take this to the ethics committee. You can destroy my career. It would be fair. I did something unforgivable. No, Pearl said firmly. You did something that saved my life. Was it unethical? Yes. Was it illegal? Probably. But unforgivable? No. Samara looked at her with surprise. Why are you being so understanding about this? You should be angry. You should be scared to be near someone capable of lying so easily. Because... Pearl took another step forward, now inches from Samara. I understand what it's like to make desperate decisions. I understand what it's like to feel something so intense it defies all logic. And for 7 years, I also thought about you. About that hand that held mine. About that voice that asked me not to leave. I thought it had been my imagination, a trauma-induced hallucination. But it was real, wasn't it? Samara nodded, tears shining in her eyes. It was completely real. Without thinking, acting on pure instinct, Pearl raised her hand and touched Samara's face. Her fingers traced the line of her jaw, feeling the warm, soft skin. Samara remained motionless, holding her breath, as if the slightest movement could break the spell. Why did you pull away? Pearl asked. After that night when I woke up, you were there. But then you became cold, distant, like nothing had happened. Because I was scared, Samara confessed. I was scared that if I stayed close, I'd reveal too much. I was scared my feelings would compromise your recovery. And I was scared that if you realized what I felt, you'd reject me. Or worse, that you'd reciprocate only out of gratitude, because I saved your life. Pearl smiled sadly. And did you ever consider asking me what I wanted? Samara shook her head. I didn't have the right. You were my patient. There was a line I shouldn't cross. "But you already crossed it," Pearl murmured. "You crossed it when you decided to save me at any cost. You crossed it when you held my hand like your life depended on it. You crossed it when you spent 7 years thinking about me." "I know," Samara whispered. The space between them had reduced to nothing. Pearl could feel the heat emanating from Samara's body, could see how her pupils dilated, could hear the accelerated breathing that betrayed the apparent calm. There were so many things to say, so many unanswered questions, so much pain and confusion accumulated over 7 years. But in that moment, the only thing that mattered was this: 2 women who'd met at the worst possible time, who'd kept secrets and lies and half-truths, who were finally face to face without masks or barriers. Pearl leaned forward, and Samara didn't pull away. Their lips met in a kiss that was both a question and an answer, both forgiveness and accusation. It was soft and desperate at once, filled with 7 years of repressed longing. When they separated, both were trembling. "This is crazy," Samara said, her forehead resting against Pearl's. "We shouldn't." "Probably not," Pearl agreed. "But we've already done many things we shouldn't. What's one more?" Samara laughed, a broken but genuine sound. "You're right. I'm a bad influence." "The worst," Pearl joked, and this time it was Samara who initiated the kiss. But reality imposed itself when the beeper on Samara's belt started beeping insistently. Samara pulled away with a frustrated sigh, checking the message. "I have to go to the ER. A multi-trauma case just came in." Pearl nodded, understanding. This was Samara's world, a world where emergencies didn't wait, where personal emotions had to be paused when lives were at risk. "Go," Pearl said. "I'll go back to the basement." But before Samara could leave through the door, Pearl stopped her. "Samara, we're not done with this conversation." Samara turned, and in her eyes was a promise. "I know. When my shift ends, at 7 in the morning, can we talk?" "I'll be here." Samara nodded and ran down the hallway, leaving Pearl alone in the office. Pearl stood there for a moment, touching her lips, still feeling the ghost of that kiss. She'd come to this hospital looking for answers about her past, but she'd found something much more complicated. She'd found someone who loved her enough to destroy her own life to save hers. And now she had to decide what to do with that truth. She returned to the basement, but couldn't concentrate on the mural. She sat on the floor, her back against the cold wall, and let her mind process everything. Samara's confession, the kiss, the realization that what she'd felt that night hadn't been a product of her imagination. But there was also fear. Fear that this was too complicated, too dangerous. Samara had altered medical records for her. What else was she capable of? And what did that mean for any relationship they might try to build? The hours passed slowly. Pearl tried to work, but finally gave up and simply waited. At 6:30 in the morning, when dawn light was beginning to filter through the basement's small windows, she heard footsteps approaching. Samara appeared at the door, still in her coat stained with blood, her hair disheveled and deep dark circles. She looked exhausted, but when her eyes found Pearl's, she smiled. "It was a long night," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "I can imagine," Pearl replied, standing up. "Is everyone okay?" "Yes, the patient will survive." An awkward silence fell between them. It was strange how just hours ago they'd been kissing, and now they didn't know how to start a simple conversation. "I need to shower and change," Samara finally said. "But after, would you like to have breakfast with me? There's a cafe 2 blocks away that makes amazing pancakes." Pearl felt something warm expand in her chest. It was so simple, so normal. Going to breakfast. Like 2 normal people, not as doctor and patient, not as keepers of secrets, but just as two women getting to know each other. "I'd love to," she replied. Samara's smile widened, genuine and beautiful, and for a moment, all the tiredness seemed to vanish from her face. "Give me 30 minutes, and if any part of this story feels like your life, the hype button helps keep it from staying silent." While Samara went to change, Pearl gathered her things in the basement. She took one last look at Rivera's mural, at those eternal figures struggling in their frame of ochre and red colors. For the first time since arriving at this hospital, she felt that maybe, just maybe, her own struggle could have a different ending. 35 minutes later, Samara appeared transformed. Clean jeans, a simple white shirt, and her wet hair pulled back in a ponytail. Without the white coat, without the stethoscope, she looked younger, more vulnerable. They walked together through the streets of the Mission District, which were beginning to wake with the new day. Street vendors set up their stalls. The smell of coffee and freshly baked bread filled the air, and the first rays of sun painted the Victorian facades in golden tones. The cafe was small and cozy, with exposed brick walls and worn wooden tables. They sat in a corner by a window overlooking the street. They ordered blueberry pancakes, drip coffee, and bagels. During the first few minutes, they talked about superficial things: the weather, the mural, the progress in restoration. It was as if both needed that neutral space before diving into deeper waters. But eventually, Samara broke the facade. "What happened that night, Pearl? You never told me how you ended up injured. The ambulance report was vague, and your file didn't have many details." Pearl stirred her coffee, watching the dark liquid form small swirls. "It was a stupid accident," she finally said. "I was working on restoring an altarpiece in an old church in the Castro. It was late, I was alone, and part of the scaffolding collapsed. I fell onto some metal pipes on the ground. One went through my abdomen." Samara paled. "God, that must have been terrifying." "It was," Pearl admitted. "I called emergency services, but the wait felt eternal. I thought I was going to die alone in that dark church, surrounded by saints who couldn't help me." "Why were you alone so late?" Pearl hesitated before answering. "Because back then, I had no one. My parents died when I was 20. I don't have siblings. My last relationship had ended badly 6 months before. Work was all I had left, so I immersed myself in it until I forgot everything else." Samara reached her hand across the table, and Pearl took it without thinking. "You're not alone now," Samara said softly. "Aren't I?" Pearl asked with a sad smile. "We barely know each other. 7 years is a long time. We're both different people now." "Maybe," Samara conceded. "But there are things that don't change. That connection I felt that night, it's still there. Don't you feel it?" Pearl squeezed Samara's hand. "I feel it. But I'm also scared. Scared this is just nostalgia for a traumatic moment. Scared that when we really get to know who we are now, we'll discover there's nothing more than a shared past." "Then let's get to know each other," Samara proposed. "Really, no secrets, no lies. Give me the chance to show you who I am beyond that moment. And I want to know the Pearl of now, not just the scared woman on a stretcher." It was a simple but terrifying proposal, opening up completely to someone, especially someone who'd already seen her most vulnerable moments. But as she looked into Samara's honey-colored eyes, Pearl felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. "Okay," she said, "but we have to go slow. I can't dive headfirst into this." "Slow is fine," Samara agreed. "We have time. I'm not going anywhere." They finished their breakfast talking about lighter things. Samara told her about her family in Seattle, about her 2 older sisters who constantly told her she worked too much. Pearl talked about her passion for art, about how each restoration was like solving a historical puzzle. It was easy, natural, as if they'd been doing this for years. When they left the cafe, it was almost noon. Samara had to go home to sleep a few hours before her next shift, and Pearl needed to go to her lab to analyze samples from the mural. They said goodbye on the corner, and for a moment, neither knew what to do. A hug, a kiss, just goodbye. Finally, Samara leaned in and gently kissed Pearl's cheek. "See you tonight," she said. "Will you come to the hospital?" "Yes," Pearl replied. "I have a lot of work ahead." As she walked back to her apartment in Soma, Pearl felt something strange and wonderful. Butterflies in her stomach. It was ridiculous. She was 34 years old, not a teenager. But there they were, fluttering and making every step feel lighter. She'd come to this hospital looking for answers about her past, and what she'd found was the possibility of a future she'd never imagined. But as she opened her apartment door, a small voice in her mind reminded her that there were still unresolved things. Samara had altered her medical file. Dr. Green, who'd made the initial diagnosis, still worked at the hospital, and the nurses had mentioned there'd almost been an ethics investigation. What else had happened that Samara hadn't told her? And what would happen if the truth came to light now? These questions haunted her the rest of the day, even as she tried to focus on analyzing pigment samples. And when she returned to the hospital that night with a mix of anticipation and anxiety, she didn't know she was about to discover that the secrets of that night were much deeper than she'd imagined, and that the truth, when it finally came to light, would test not only her relationship with Samara, but also everything she thought she knew about love, forgiveness, and the impossible decisions we make to protect those we love. Pearl arrived at the hospital that night with a different energy. She was no longer the tense, alert woman of the first few days, nor the distant professional she pretended to be. Now she was someone with a purpose beyond restoring a mural. She was someone who had kissed Samara Hayes and felt the world rearrange itself around her. But she was also someone with questions. Many questions. She went down to the basement as usual, turned on the work lamps, and started working on a particularly delicate section of the mural where moisture had stripped away almost all the pigment layer. It required absolute concentration, but her mind kept returning to that morning. Breakfast with Samara, the way their hands had found each other across the table. The tacit promise that this, whatever it was worth exploring. At 11:15, Samara appeared at the door. She brought 2 cups of coffee and a bag of donuts from the corner Starbucks. She smiled shyly, as if unsure of her welcome. "Thought you might be hungry," she said. Pearl set down her brush and wiped her hands on a rag. "I'm always hungry when I work nights. Thank you." Samara entered and handed her the coffee. Their fingers brushed briefly, and that simple contact was enough to send an electric shock down Pearl's spine. "How's the mural coming?" Samara asked, approaching to observe the work. "Better than I expected." Rivera used a mixed technique, which is complicated to restore, but it also means the piece has more layers of natural protection. "With luck, I'll finish in 2 weeks. And after?" Samara's question sounded casual, but Pearl detected the underlying anxiety. "Will you leave?" Pearl took a sip of coffee before responding. "I have other projects waiting. A restoration in Portland, another in Seattle. But..." She paused, searching for the right words. "I'm not in a hurry to leave." The smile that lit up Samara's face was like sunrise. "I'm glad to hear that." They sat together on the floor, backs against the wall, sharing the donuts in comfortable silence. It was strange how they could be like this, without needing to fill every second with words, as if they'd known each other their whole lives instead of just days. "Can I ask you something?" Pearl said after a while. "Of course." You said you altered my file to protect Dr. Green. But what happened to him? Does he still work here? Samara's expression darkened. He retired 2 years ago. Left before there could be any formal investigation. I think he knew he'd made a mistake that night, but he never admitted it publicly. And you? Does anyone else know what you did? Samara shook her head. Just me. And now you. The ethics committee asked some questions after your case, but since you survived without surgery and recovered completely, they decided it wasn't worth pursuing. It was classified as sound clinical judgment and filed away. But it wasn't sound, was it? Pearl pressed. Dr. Green was wrong, and you knew it. Yes, Samara admitted. And every day since then, I've lived with that guilt. Not for saving you. I'll never regret that. But for the lie. For being complicit in a system that protects reputations instead of patients. Pearl observed Samara's profile under the dim work lights. There was something deeply honorable in her pain, in the way she carried that weight without complaint. Is that why you work so much? Why you practically live in this hospital? Pearl asked gently. Samara turned to look at her, surprised. How do you know that? The nurses talk, Pearl interrupted. They say since that night you changed, that you became obsessed with never making mistakes again. Samara let out a bitter laugh. It's not obsession, it's responsibility. After what happened with you, I realized how fragile all of this is. A wrong diagnosis, a rushed decision, a second of distraction, and someone dies. Someone like you. Her voice broke slightly. I couldn't live knowing my carelessness could cost someone else their life. Pearl reached out and took Samara's hand, intertwining their fingers. You can't save everyone, Samara. You can't live in this hospital forever, punishing yourself for a mistake you didn't even make. I know, Samara whispered. But I don't know how to stop. I don't know how to be someone different from this. At that moment, Samara's beeper sounded. She checked it with a resigned sigh. ER. Again. But before she could stand up, Pearl stopped her. When your shift ends, can we talk more? There are things I need to understand. About that night. About us. About all of this. Samara nodded, squeezing Pearl's hand before releasing it. I'll find you at 7. Pearl spent the next few hours working on autopilot, her mind processing everything Samara had revealed. There was something admirable but also frightening about the way Samara had turned herself into a martyr of her own guilt. How could they build something real if Samara lived chained to the past? At 3 a.m, while cleaning a brush, she heard voices in the hallway. They weren't the usual voices of medical staff. These sounded tense, agitated. Pearl left her work and approached the door, opening it just a crack. 2 men in white coats stood in front of the staff break area. One was older, with gray hair and an authoritative bearing. The other was younger, with glasses and a tablet in his hand. I don't understand why you're reviewing those files now, the young man was saying, clearly nervous. They're closed cases from years ago. Because the health department audit is random, but thorough, the older man replied in a severe tone. And they found discrepancies in several files from 2017, including one from October where a patient with abdominal trauma received conservative treatment instead of emergency surgery. The numbers don't add up, Dr. Williams. Pearl felt her heart stop. They were talking about her case. What kind of discrepancies? Dr. Williams asked. The vital signs reported in the ER don't match those recorded in the ICU 2 hours later. It's as if there were 2 different versions of the same patient. And the doctor in charge of the case was Dr. Hayes, Williams completed quietly. Exactly. I need to speak with her. Is she on shift tonight? Yes, she's in the ER treating a trauma patient. Tell her to find me when she's done. This can't wait." The men walked away down the hallway, and Pearl closed the door with trembling hands. An audit. They were auditing the case. After 7 years, someone had finally noticed the discrepancies Samara had created to protect her. What did this mean? Would Samara lose her license? Could she face criminal charges? And most importantly, should Pearl do something about it? She tried to return to work, but it was impossible to concentrate. She paced back and forth in the restoration room, feeling anxiety tighten her chest. At 5 a.m, she couldn't stand it anymore. She left the basement and went up to the second floor, looking for Samara's office. She found it empty. Samara must still be in the ER. Pearl sat in the chair in front of the cluttered desk, surrounded by medical files and textbooks. There were photos on the bookshelf. Samara with her sisters, Samara at a graduation ceremony, Samara with a group of colleagues. But no photos of a partner, no images suggesting a life outside this hospital. It was as if Samara had put her life on pause that night 7 years ago and never pressed play again. At 6:30, Samara entered the office. She stopped upon seeing Pearl there, surprise crossing her face before transforming into concern. "What happened?" she asked, closing the door behind her. "I heard 2 doctors talking in the hallway a few hours ago," Pearl said without preamble. "There's an audit. They're reviewing your case, Samara. My case. They found the discrepancies." All the blood seemed to drain from Samara's face. She leaned against the door, as if needing something solid to stay upright. "Who were they?" she asked in a strangled voice. "I don't know their names. One older, one young with glasses. The older one said he needed to talk to you." Samara brought her hands to her face, and Pearl saw her shoulders begin to tremble. She stood and approached, taking Samara's wrists and gently pulling her hands away. "Look at me," she said firmly. "Look at me, Samara." When Samara finally looked up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "This is the end," she whispered. 7 years waiting for this to happen, and it's finally happening. I'm going to lose everything. "No," Pearl said with determination. "Not if I can help it." "What?" Samara looked at her with confusion. "Pearl, there's nothing you can do. The evidence is there. The records speak for themselves." "Then we'll make them speak differently." Pearl took Samara's face in her hands. "I was your patient, right? My testimony matters. I can say I was fully aware of my treatment, that I gave informed consent for conservative management. I can say the symptoms initially reported were exaggerated by the panicked paramedic, not by a wrong medical diagnosis." "That would be lying," Samara said weakly. "So what?" Pearl replied. "You lied for me. Now it's my turn to lie for you." "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking. I'm offering." Pearl brought her forehead to Samara's. "You saved my life, Samara. You risked everything for someone you didn't even know. Now let me save you. If you've made it this far, subscribe. The best parts are yet to come." Samara closed her eyes, and finally, the tears escaped, rolling down her cheeks. Pearl wiped them away with her thumbs, with a tenderness that surprised even herself. When had this woman become so important? When had she decided that protecting her was more important than any consequence? "I don't want you involved in this," Samara said, her voice broken. "You've already suffered enough because of me. It wasn't your fault. And I'm not going to stand by while they destroy the person who gave me a second chance at life." Samara opened her eyes, and in them was something new, hope mixed with fear. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me." "I know you," Pearl responded. I know the person who was by my side in the worst moment of my life. I know the person who spent 7 years punishing herself for saving me. I know the person who kisses like the world's going to end tomorrow. And I know you're someone worth protecting." For the first time since entering the office, Samara smiled. It was a small, fragile smile, but real. "You're incredible," she whispered. "And you're a fool for thinking you could face this alone," Pearl replied, but without malice. The moment was interrupted by a knock on the door. They separated quickly. Samara wiped her cheeks and cleared her throat before opening. It was the older man Pearl had seen in the hallway, tall, about 60, with a serious expression that brooked no nonsense. "Dr. Hayes," he said without preamble. "I'm Dr. Richard Thompson, head of internal audit. I need to speak with you about a case from October 2017. Samara nodded, adopting a professional posture despite the emotional storm Pearl knew was raging inside her. "Of course, Dr. Thompson. Would you like to go to your office?" "Here is fine," the doctor said, but then noticed Pearl's presence. "Although I'd prefer privacy." "She can stay," Samara said before Pearl could move. "This is Pearl Carter, the patient from the case you're reviewing." Dr. Thompson raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Really?" He studied Pearl with renewed interest. "What a convenient coincidence." There was something in his tone that suggested he didn't believe in coincidences. Pearl kept her expression neutral, aware that every word and gesture would be analyzed. "I'm working on the mural restoration in the basement," Pearl explained. "Dr. Hayes and I reconnected after 7 years." "I see." Dr. Thompson pulled a tablet from his briefcase. "Well, since you're here, perhaps you can help us clarify some things. According to the records, you were admitted with penetrating abdominal trauma and vital signs indicating hypovolemic shock. However, you weren't subjected to emergency surgery, but to conservative treatment. Do you remember being conscious during those medical decisions?" Pearl kept her gaze steady. "I remember being very scared and in a lot of pain. I remember Dr. Hayes explaining that they were going to monitor me carefully before deciding if I needed surgery. It seemed reasonable to me." "Did she explain why she decided to go against standard protocol for your type of injury?" "She told me my hemorrhage was manageable and that surgery had risks, that it was better to wait and see if my body could stabilize on its own. And it did." Dr. Thompson was taking notes on his tablet, his expression inscrutable. "And you agreed with that treatment plan?" "Completely," Pearl lied without hesitation. "I trusted her judgment, and obviously she was right. Here I am, alive and well." "Yes, here you are." The doctor studied her for a long moment. "Ms. Carter, are you aware that the ER records describe your condition as critical, while the ICU records 2 hours later describe you as stable? That's an extraordinarily rapid recovery." Pearl shrugged. "I'm not a doctor. I just know I felt better after Dr. Hayes treated me. Maybe the paramedics exaggerated my condition. They were very nervous." "Maybe," Dr. Thompson conceded, but his tone suggested skepticism. "Dr. Hayes, I'll need you to come to my office this afternoon with all documents related to this case, including your personal notes if you have them." "Of course," Samara replied, keeping her voice firm. Thompson headed toward the door but stopped at the threshold. "One more thing. Dr. Marcus Green was the ER physician on duty that night. He made the initial diagnosis. Was there any disagreement between you two about the treatment?" Pearl saw Samara swallow hard. "We discussed the options," she said carefully. "Dr. Green favored immediate intervention. I suggested a more conservative approach. In the end, since I'd be the one monitoring the patient in the ICU, my decision was respected." "Interesting," Dr. Thompson made another note. We'll see you at 3 p.m., Dr. Hayes, and Ms. Carter will likely contact you for a formal statement." "I'll be available," Pearl responded. When the door closed behind the doctor, Samara collapsed into her chair, visibly trembling. Pearl knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "You did well," she said. "You were firm and professional." "This is just the beginning," Samara said. "They're going to review everything, every note, every record, every decision I made, and they're going to find the inconsistencies. Then we'll make sure those inconsistencies have a reasonable explanation." Pearl squeezed her hands. "You're not alone in this." Samara looked at her with a mix of gratitude and desperation. "Why are you risking so much for me?" Pearl smiled softly. "Because you're a noble fool who saved my life. And because..." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "Because when I look at you, I see someone who deserves to be saved too." The silence that followed was intense, charged with emotions neither knew how to name yet. Finally, Samara leaned forward and kissed Pearl. It wasn't the desperate kiss from the other night, but something softer, deeper. A kiss that said, "Thank you," and "I need you," and "I don't know what to do with you, but I don't want you to leave." When they separated, Pearl stood up. "You need to go home and rest before that meeting. You need to be at your best." "I can't sleep," Samara protested. "I'm too wired." "Then I'll come with you and make sure you sleep," Pearl said with determination. Samara looked at her surprised. "Really?" "Really. Now let's go. My car's in the parking lot." 20 minutes later, they were in Samara's apartment in No Valley. It was a small but tidy space, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, and a living room kitchen combo. The walls were bare, without personal decoration. It looked more like a temporary hotel than a home. "I don't spend much time here," Samara said, as if apologizing for the austerity. "Basically, I just come to sleep." "I know," Pearl replied gently. "That's why I'm here, to make sure you actually sleep this time." Samara changed into comfortable clothes while Pearl closed the curtains, blocking out the daylight. When Samara got into bed, Pearl sat beside her, gently stroking her hair. "Close your eyes," she murmured. "I'll stay here." "Don't you have work?" Samara asked, her voice already drowsy. "Nothing that can't wait. Sleep." And surprisingly, Samara did sleep. Pearl stayed there, watching her, thinking about the irony of it all. 7 years ago, Samara had been by her side while she fought to live. Now it was Pearl who was by her side, protecting her as she faced the consequences of having fought for her. Love, Pearl thought, was strange and circular, and completely unexpected. She didn't know exactly when she'd fallen in love with Samara Hayes. Maybe it had been that night 7 years ago, on some subconscious level. Maybe it had been the first time their eyes met in the conference room. Or maybe it had been in every small moment since then, accumulating like drops of water until they formed an ocean. What she did know was that she wasn't going to let this ocean swallow them. They were going to survive this, together. Pearl left Samara sleeping at 2 p.m, with a note on the nightstand. "You'll be amazing. I trust you. See you at the hospital tonight." She drove back to her apartment in Soma, needing time to process everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. She showered, changed clothes, and then did something she hadn't done in years. She called her best friend, Maya, whom she'd studied art conservation with at Berkeley. "Pearl, are you alive?" Maya answered, surprised. "I thought you'd moved into a cave or something." "Very funny," Pearl replied, collapsing onto her couch. "I need your advice." "About restoration? Because if it's about your personal life, we both know I'm a disaster in that department." "It's about..." Pearl hesitated. I met someone. The silence on the other end was so long, Pearl checked if the call was still connected. Maya? Give me a second. I need to sit down. Pearl Carter, the woman who swore art was her only true love, met someone? I know, it's weird, but it's complicated. Complicated how? Is she married? Does she have kids? Is she a fugitive criminal? None of that. Pearl took a deep breath. She's the doctor who saved my life 7 years ago. This time the silence was even longer. I need you to tell me the whole story. Now. And Pearl did. She told her about the hospital, about the reunion with Samara, about the medical secret, about the kisses, and finally, about the audit. Maya listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. Okay, Maya said when Pearl finished. I have several opinions. Want the honest version or the best friend version? Both. All right. As your best friend, I say it's beautiful that you found someone who literally brought you back from death and who's clearly in love with you. As a rational person, I say you're getting into a huge mess by getting involved in a possible ethics investigation. I know, Pearl admitted, but I can't just abandon her. I'm not telling you to abandon her. I'm telling you to be careful. If that audit gets serious, you could face consequences too. Giving false testimony isn't a game. It's not false testimony if I really believe what I'm saying, Pearl argued, though she knew it was weak rationalization. Pearl. Maya's tone softened. Just promise you'll think things through carefully before diving headfirst. I know when you fall in love with something, or someone, you do it completely. But you need to protect yourself too. I promise, Pearl said, though she wasn't sure she could keep that promise. After hanging up, Pearl tried to work on her mural analyses, but her mind kept returning to Samara. How had the meeting with Dr. Thompson gone? Had they found anything else? Would Samara be okay? At 7 p.m, she couldn't take it anymore. She drove back to the hospital, went down to the basement, but couldn't concentrate on the mural. At 8:30, she went up to the second floor and knocked on Samara's office door. No answer. Pearl tried the door handle and, finding it unlocked, entered. The office was empty, but there were signs that Samara had been there. Her coat hanging on the back of the chair, a half-finished cup of coffee, documents scattered across the desk. Pearl didn't intend to snoop. Really, she didn't. But her gaze fell on an open file on the desk, and the name on the label was hers. Carter, Pearl, October 2017. With her heart pounding, she approached the desk. The file contained copies of all her medical records from that night. But what caught her attention was a handwritten note in the margin of one of the reports, in Samara's tight handwriting. Initial blood pressure reported, 70/40. Actual blood pressure measured by me, 95/60. Discrepancy of 25 points. Equipment error or intentional manipulation. Pearl felt her blood freeze. Intentional manipulation? What did that mean? Had someone altered her vital signs before Samara even saw her? She kept reading the notes. There were more discrepancies documented. Heart rate, temperature, even the wound description. Everything seemed to indicate that the initial reports had dramatically exaggerated her condition. But why? Who would benefit from making her injury seem more serious than it was? The answer came with chilling clarity. Dr. Green. If her injury seemed critical, no one would question his decision to operate immediately. And for a surgeon, more surgeries meant more prestige, more documented experience, more opportunities for advancement. Pearl remembered what Samara had said, that Dr. Green had retired before there could be an investigation. Had he known someone would eventually discover his manipulation? Is that why he left? And Samara hadn't just corrected a wrong diagnosis. She'd discovered possible criminal negligence, and instead of reporting it, she'd covered everything up, protecting both Pearl and Dr. Green. "You shouldn't be reading that." Pearl spun around sharply. Samara was at the door, arms crossed and looking exhausted. She had deep dark circles and her hair was disheveled, as if she'd been running her hands through it constantly. "Is it true?" Pearl asked, pointing to the file. "Did Dr. Green manipulate my vital signs?" Samara entered and closed the door harder than necessary. "It's a theory. I can't prove it." "Did you tell Dr. Thompson?" "No." Samara collapsed into her chair. "Because if I did, everything would unravel. Not just my career, but Dr. Green's too. And he has a family that depends on his pension. His daughters are in college, his wife has health problems. Ruining him wouldn't change what already happened." Pearl felt anger bubbling inside her. "So he gets away with it. He manipulated my case, probably manipulated others, and no one does anything." "Yes," Samara said flatly. "That's how the system works sometimes. Those with power and connections protect each other. Those of us who try to do the right thing end up caught in the middle." "And what did Dr. Thompson say at the meeting?" Samara rubbed her face with both hands. "He said the discrepancies are concerning, but that your testimony helps. He also said they're going to review other cases I handled that year, looking for patterns. If they find more inconsistencies, there'll be a formal investigation. And if they don't find anything, then this gets filed as a closed case with minor irregularities that didn't affect patient outcome. Basically, a warning without real consequences." Pearl studied Samara. She looked defeated, exhausted, as if she'd been carrying this weight for so long she no longer remembered what it was like to be without it. "How many more are there?" Pearl asked softly. "How many other cases where Dr. Green did something similar?" Samara looked up, surprised by the question. "I don't know for sure. But during the year I worked with him, there were rumors. Other doctors whispering about aggressive diagnoses, about patients going to surgery when maybe they didn't need it. But no one wanted to confront him. He was too powerful, too respected." "Until you did," Pearl said. "When you decided not to operate, you confronted him, even if you did it privately. And look where that got me," Samara replied bitterly. 7 years living in fear that someone would discover what I did." Pearl stood and walked around the desk, taking Samara's hands and pulling her to her feet. She wrapped her in a hug, feeling Samara tense at first before finally relaxing and burying her face in Pearl's shoulder. "You can't keep carrying this alone," Pearl murmured against her hair. "It's too much. It's consuming you. I don't know how to let it go," Samara confessed, her voice muffled against Pearl's shirt. "It's part of who I am now. Then we'll find a way, together." They stayed like that for a long moment, embraced in the small office space. Outside, the hospital continued its eternal routine. Patients arriving, others leaving, some healing, others saying goodbye. Life and death in constant cycle. Finally, Samara pulled away, discreetly wiping her eyes. "I have to make rounds in 30 minutes. Will I see you later?" "Yes," Pearl replied. "I'll be in the basement. Come when you can." But before Samara could leave, Pearl stopped her with a question that had been circling her mind. "Why me, Samara? Of all the patients you've treated, why was I different?" Samara slowly turned, and in her eyes was a vulnerability Pearl hadn't seen before. "Because when I saw you, with blood on your clothes and terror in your eyes, but also with so much determination not to give up, I saw someone worth fighting for, and when I took your hand and you felt my pulse, your eyes calmed. Like somehow you knew you'd be okay. Like you trusted me without even knowing me. And in that moment, I knew I couldn't let you down, no matter the cost." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. "You didn't let me down." Pearl finally said. "You saved me. In every possible way." Samara smiled, a small but genuine smile, before leaving the office. Pearl stayed there for a moment, processing everything. Then she returned to the basement, but not to work on the mural. She needed to think, needed to understand all the pieces of this puzzle. There was something that didn't add up. If Dr. Green had manipulated her vital signs to justify surgery, why hadn't Samara reported it immediately? Yes, she'd said she wanted to protect his family, but was that the only reason? Or was there something else Samara wasn't saying? Pearl pulled out her phone and searched for information about Dr. Marcus Green. She found old articles about him, recognitions for his work, photos at medical events. He was respected, admired, a pillar of the medical community. But in more recent articles, just before his retirement, there was a brief mention of a civil lawsuit. A patient had sued the hospital for an unnecessary surgery that had resulted in complications. The case had been settled out of court for an undisclosed sum, and Dr. Green had announced his retirement a month later. Pearl felt the pieces beginning to fit. Dr. Green hadn't left just out of fear of being discovered. He'd been forced out, discreetly, to avoid a bigger scandal. And probably, as part of the agreement, he'd ensured no formal investigation would proceed, which meant there were people in positions of power who knew what he'd done, and they'd chosen to cover it up. Did Samara know this? Is that why she'd kept quiet all these years? Out of fear that if she spoke up, they'd make her responsible too? Pearl needed answers, and this time, she wasn't going to accept half-truths. At 2 a.m, Samara finally came down to the basement. She looked even more tired than before, with coffee stains on her coat and her stethoscope hanging crooked around her neck. "It was a rough night," she said, collapsing on the floor next to Pearl. 3 ER admissions. 1 almost didn't make it. "Is she okay now?" Pearl asked. "Yes. Stable. Her daughters were able to see her before we took her to the ICU." Pearl took Samara's hand, feeling the calluses on her palms, the result of years of constant work. "I researched Dr. Green," she said without preamble. "I found out about the lawsuit, about his forced retirement." Samara tensed. "Why did you do that?" "Because I needed to understand, and because I deserve to know the whole truth, not just the parts you decide to tell me." Samara tried to pull her hand away, but Pearl held it firmly. "I'm not judging you," Pearl continued. "I just want to understand. Did you know about the lawsuit? Did you know they were forcing him to retire?" Samara closed her eyes, defeated. "I found out after. When Dr. Thompson, the same one doing the audit now, called me to his office. He told me he knew there were irregularities in Dr. Green's case, including yours. He said they could handle the situation discreetly if I cooperated by staying silent. If not, well, he implied I could be seen as an accomplice." The anger Pearl had felt earlier returned, more intense. "They blackmailed you." "They protected me," Samara corrected. Or at least, that's what they said. They said if I kept my mouth shut, they'd make sure Dr. Green couldn't do more harm. And they did. They got him out of the hospital. But you were left with the guilt, with the fear, with the burden of keeping the secret. "Yes," Samara admitted. "Because in their twisted minds, that was the fair deal. They protected their institutional reputation, and I kept my license. Everyone won, except the truth." Pearl felt tears of frustration burning her eyes. "That's horrible, Samara. It's abuse." "I know." Samara finally opened her eyes, and in them was an ancient sadness. "But I didn't know what else to do. I was 28, relatively new to the hospital, and they were authority figures. Who would have believed me if I'd spoken up? I would have believed you, Pearl said vehemently. If you'd told me when I woke up, I would have believed you. I couldn't risk you too, Samara replied. You'd already suffered enough. The last thing you needed was to get involved in a medical scandal. Pearl pulled Samara toward her, hugging her tightly. You should have given me the option to decide. We were two adult people. We could have faced it together. I know, Samara whispered against her hair. I made many mistakes that night. Not immediately reporting Dr. Green was one. Altering your file was another. But the worst was pulling away from you after, because I was too scared that if you got close, you'd discover what a mess my life was. Pearl pulled back enough to look into Samara's eyes. You're not a mess. You're someone who was put in an impossible position and made the best decision you could. No one can ask more than that. But it wasn't the best decision, Samara argued. The best decision would have been to report everything from the beginning, regardless of the consequences. Maybe, Pearl conceded. But you can't change the past. You can only decide what to do now. Samara looked at her with curiosity and a touch of hope. What do you suggest? Pearl took a deep breath, making a decision she knew would change everything. I think we should tell Dr. Thompson the truth. Not about altering the file. That would only hurt you. But about Dr. Green's suspicions. About the discrepancies you noticed. About the blackmail you suffered after. That could reopen the whole investigation, Samara said, pale. It could destroy my career anyway. Or it could free you, Pearl countered. Because now you're not alone. Now you have me. And if they try to make you responsible for exposing others' corruption, we'll make sure the whole world knows what really happened. Samara looked at her as if seeing someone completely new. You'd do that for me? Even if it means fighting the whole system? I'd do that and more, Pearl replied simply. Because I love you, Samara. I don't know exactly when it happened, whether it was that night 7 years ago or this week. But it happened. And when you love someone, you fight for them, no matter what. The silence that followed was absolute. Samara stared at her with wide eyes, as if she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. You love me? She whispered. Yes, Pearl said, feeling strangely liberated by admitting it. I'm probably an idiot for falling in love so fast, but here we are. Samara burst out laughing, a sound half laugh, half sob. I love you too. God, I love you so much it scares me. I've been loving you for 7 years, even when I didn't know where you were or if I'd ever see you again. They kissed then, deep and desperate, and full of promises. It wasn't the first kiss, but it felt like a new one, like the seal of something important, something that would change the course of their lives. When they separated, both were trembling slightly. Are we really going to do this? Samara asked. Are we really going to confront Dr. Thompson with the truth? Really, Pearl confirmed. But we'll do it the right way, with evidence, with strategy, and with a lawyer if necessary. Samara nodded, and for the first time in years, Pearl saw something in her eyes that had been absent. Determination. Not determination born of fear or obligation, but the determination of someone finally deciding to take control of their own story. Tomorrow, Samara said. Tomorrow we'll request a meeting with Dr. Thompson, and this time, I'll tell him everything. Everything, Pearl agreed. They spent the rest of the early morning planning exactly what they'd say, how they'd say it, and what evidence they'd present. It was almost dawn when they finally emerged from the hospital basement, stepping into the internal courtyard, where the first rays of sun painted the sky in shades of pink and orange. "Thank you," Samara said suddenly, "for showing up in my life just when I needed it most." "I showed up in your life 7 years ago," Pearl corrected with a smile. "It just took me a while to come back." "Better late than never," Samara replied, taking her hand as they walked toward the parking lot. And as Pearl drove home with the rising sun reflecting off the city buildings, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope mixed with purpose. She didn't know how this would all end, whether they'd come out unscathed or hurt. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. They weren't alone anymore. And together, they could face anything. Comment what you would do in Pearl's place. The Ethics Committee investigation stretched over 2 weeks that felt like 2 years. Pearl finished the Rivera mural, restoring it to its original glory, but she could barely enjoy the accomplishment. Her mind was constantly with Samara, who faced interrogations, file reviews, and the relentless scrutiny of colleagues and superiors. Dr. Green had disappeared after that confrontation in the hallway. According to rumors circulating through the hospital, he'd taken an indefinite medical leave and temporarily moved to Portland with his family. But everyone knew the truth. He was running, hoping the storm would pass without touching him directly. Pearl had given her testimony before Dr. Thompson and a panel of 3 external physicians. She'd been meticulous, honest as far as she could be without incriminating Samara, and firm in her defense of the medical decision that had saved her life. She described the symptoms she'd actually experienced that night, the treatments she received, and how Samara's care had been not only competent, but exceptional. "Dr. Hayes saved my life," Pearl had said, looking directly into the eyes of each panel member. "Not with unnecessary surgery, not with aggressive interventions, but with careful observation and conservative treatment. If you're investigating whether she did something wrong, you're looking in the wrong place. You should be investigating why the initial diagnosis was so dramatically wrong." Those words had hung in the air of the conference room like a time bomb. Pearl saw how the panel members exchanged significant glances. Everyone knew what she was referring to. Everyone knew Dr. Green was at the center of this. But the medical system, like all systems, protected its own, especially those with decades of service and powerful connections. Samara, on the other hand, had to face much more pointed questions. Why had she contradicted the ER physician? Did she have documented evidence of her clinical reasoning? Had she followed proper protocol to escalate the decision? Was there any personal motivation in her case management? That last question had made Samara freeze. Pearl knew because Samara told her everything afterward, during one of their nights at Pearl's apartment, where Samara had started spending more time, fleeing the emptiness of her own space. "They asked me if I'd developed feelings for you during your treatment," Samara had said, curled up on the couch with a mug of tea in her hands. "And I couldn't completely lie. I told them I felt an unusual connection with you, that I cared more than usual about your recovery, but I insisted it didn't compromise my medical judgment, that in fact it made me more careful, more vigilant." "Did they believe you?" Pearl had asked, stroking her hair. "I don't know." Samara had closed her eyes, leaning into Pearl's touch. Dr. Thompson looked at me like she could see right through me, like she knew there was more than what I was saying. And she probably did. It was hard to hide the kind of connection Pearl and Samara had developed. It was evident in every look, in every word, in the way their bodies leaned toward each other even when they tried to maintain professional distance. The whole hospital knew by then. Nurses whispered, doctors speculated, cleaning staff made discreet comments. The art conservator and the internal medicine doctor, the patient and her savior, a story that was both romantic and potentially scandalous. But Pearl discovered she didn't care. She'd spent too many years hiding, protecting her heart, living halfway. If she was going to love, she was going to do it openly. and she loved Samara Hayes with an intensity that scared and excited her in equal measure. Subscribe to find out how this story ends. The day the ethics committee announced its decision, Pearl was in her lab analyzing samples from another project when her phone rang. It was Samara, and her voice sounded strange, neither sad nor happy, just exhausted. "The verdict is out," she said. "Can you come to the hospital?" "I'm on my way," Pearl replied, leaving everything and running to her car. She arrived at the hospital in 20 minutes, a record considering San Francisco traffic. She found Samara in her office, sitting at her desk with an official document in front of her. Dr. Morrison was there too, standing by the window with a contemplative expression. "What happened?" Pearl asked, closing the door behind her. Samara picked up the document and read it aloud, her tone mechanical. After an exhaustive review of the October 2017 case involving patient Pearl Carter, the Ethics Committee has determined that Dr. Samara Hayes acted within the scope of her medical judgment in opting for conservative treatment instead of emergency surgery. While minor discrepancies were identified in the documentation, these do not constitute evidence of malpractice or intentional negligence. Pearl felt her heart race. That sounded good, right? Samara continued reading. However, the committee finds concerning the lack of contemporaneous documentation justifying Dr. Hayes' decision to deviate from standard protocol. Consequently, she is issued a formal reprimand and required to complete 20 hours of continuing medical education in professional ethics and clinical documentation within the next 6 months. "That's it?" Pearl asked, looking between Samara and Dr. Morrison. "A reprimand and a course?" "That's it," Dr. Morrison confirmed, and there was evident relief in his voice. "She keeps her license, keeps her job, keeps her reputation. All things considered, it's the best possible outcome." "And Dr. Green?" Pearl asked. Dr. Morrison exchanged a look with Samara before responding. "Dr. Green has decided to make his retirement permanent. He won't be returning to the hospital. And..." He hesitated. "As part of his separation agreement, he won't be permitted to practice medicine at any institution affiliated with the public health network." Pearl understood what that meant. Dr. Green had been quietly expelled from medicine, but without the public scandal of a formal license revocation. The system had protected him to the end, but at least he could no longer harm more patients. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. "How do you feel?" Pearl asked Samara when Dr. Morrison left, leaving them alone. Samara set the document on the desk and leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. Relieved, exhausted, confused, all things at once. She opened her eyes and looked at Pearl. "For 7 years, I've been waiting for this to destroy me, and now that it's happened, that I survived, I don't know what to do with that energy, all that fear, all that anxiety. Where does it go now?" Pearl walked around the desk and knelt in front of Samara, taking her hands. "It goes wherever you want it to. You can let it go. You can finally allow yourself to live without that weight." "I don't know how," Samara admitted, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I've been this person, this obsessed and terrified doctor for so long. Who am I without that?" "You're Samara," Pearl said firmly. "You're brilliant, compassionate, dedicated. You're someone who risks their career to save lives. You're someone who carries the weight of their decisions with honor. And you're someone who deserves to be happy." "With you?" Samara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "If you'll have me," Pearl replied. "Yes, with me." Samara pulled Pearl up and kissed her, deep and desperate, as if she were claiming something she'd been denying herself for too long. When they separated, both were crying and laughing simultaneously. "This is crazy," Samara said. All of this. Us. This impossible story. The best stories are always a little crazy, Pearl replied. The following months were a gradual transformation. Samara reduced her hours at the hospital, started seeing a therapist to process the trauma of the last 7 years, and slowly began building a life outside the walls of San Francisco General. Pearl moved to a larger apartment in the Mission, with enough space for 2 people and a small studio where she could work on restoration projects from home. Samara started spending more nights there than in her own empty apartment, until one day, she simply never left. It wasn't a formal decision. There was no dramatic conversation about moving in together. It just happened, natural as breathing. One day, Pearl realized Samara's toothbrush was in the bathroom, her clothes filled half the closet, and her presence permeated every corner of the space. And it felt good. It felt like home. Share if you believe in second chances. But not everything was easy. There were nights when Samara woke with nightmares, reliving that night in the ER, imagining all the ways Pearl could have died. There were days when Pearl felt the weight of having uprooted Samara's life, even if it had been with the best intentions. Sometimes I wonder if I deserve this, Samara said one night, while they were in bed, city lights filtering through the curtains. This happiness, after everything I did wrong. You did the best you could in an impossible situation, Pearl replied, turning to face her. And yes, you made mistakes. We all do. But that doesn't mean you don't deserve to be happy. It means you're human. What if I fail again? What if I make another terrible decision that hurts someone? Then we'll deal with it together. Pearl kissed her forehead. Because that's what being in this together means. It's not just for the good times. It's for everything. Samara curled up against her, and Pearl felt the tension slowly drain from her body. I love you, Samara whispered. Even when I'm scared, even when I doubt, that's the one thing I'm completely sure of. I love you too, Pearl replied. And that's enough. Everything else we'll figure out as we go. 6 months after the investigation ended, Pearl received a call from the National Gallery of Art. She'd been selected to direct the restoration of a set of colonial murals in Santa Fe, a prestigious project that would last at least a year. It was the professional opportunity of her lifetime, but it meant moving to New Mexico, or at least spending most of the week there. She told Samara that night, prepared for a difficult conversation about logistics and sacrifices. But Samara simply smiled. Then we moved to Santa Fe, she said. What? Pearl looked at her surprised. You can't just leave your job at the hospital. Why not? Samara replied. I've been talking to some colleagues in Santa Fe. There's a community clinic that needs a medical director. It's not as glamorous as SF General, but it's important. It's real, and it means I'd be with you. Samara, you can't change your whole life for me. I'm not changing my life for you, Samara corrected. I'm changing my life with you. There's a difference. I've spent enough time living out of obligation and fear. I want to live by choice and love, and I choose you. I choose this. Pearl felt tears fill her eyes. Are you sure? More sure than I've been of anything, Samara replied, taking her hands. You came back into my life for a reason, Pearl. I'm not going to waste this second chance. The move to Santa Fe was chaotic and exciting. They found a small house in the historic district, with windows overlooking a colonial plaza and high ceilings with exposed wooden beams. Samara started her work at the community clinic and discovered she loved the slower pace, the more personal connection with patients. Pearl worked on the murals during the day, marveling at the beauty hidden under layers of dirt and neglect. In the evenings, she and Samara cooked together, explored the adobe streets, and built a life that was completely theirs. A year after moving to Santa Fe, Pearl was on the second-floor scaffolding of San Miguel Mission, working on a particularly delicate detail of a 17th century mural, when her phone rang. It was Samara. "Can you come home?" Samara's voice sounded strange, tense. "There's something I need to show you." Pearl's heart immediately raced. In the year they'd been together, she'd learned to read the nuances in Samara's voice. This didn't sound like a medical emergency or serious problem. It sounded like nervousness. "Give me 20 minutes, she replied. She drove home faster than prudent, her mind running through possibilities. When she entered the house, she found Samara in the living room, dressed in jeans and a simple shirt, but with an expression Pearl couldn't decipher. "What happened?" Pearl asked, setting down her backpack. "Are you okay?" "I'm okay," Samara said, then took a deep breath. "Better than okay, actually. But I need to ask you something." She approached Pearl and took her hands. And then, to Pearl's complete surprise, she knelt. "Samara," Pearl started, feeling her heartbeat so hard she could hear it. "Let me speak first," Samara interrupted, her voice trembling slightly. "I've rehearsed this 1,000 times, but now that you're in front of me, all the elegant words are gone." She pulled out a small blue velvet box from her pocket and opened it, revealing a simple silver ring with a small turquoise stone. "Pearl Carter," Samara continued. "7 years ago, I met you at the worst possible moment. You were dying, I was terrified, and the world seemed to be collapsing. But in the middle of all that chaos, I found something I didn't know I was looking for. I found you." Tears began rolling down Pearl's cheeks, but she said nothing, letting Samara continue. "We spent 7 years apart, each carrying memories of the other. And when the universe gave us a second chance, when you came back to that hospital, I knew I couldn't waste it. I knew I had to fight for this, for us, no matter the cost. You've transformed my life in ways I never imagined possible. You taught me that love doesn't have to be based on fear. You showed me I can be vulnerable without being weak. You gave me the courage to let go of the past and build a future. And now, I'm here, kneeling before you, asking you to make this future permanent. Pearl, will you marry me?" The silence that followed was absolute. Pearl looked at Samara, this incredible woman who'd saved her twice, first from death and then from a life lived halfway. She thought about everything they'd overcome together, the medical secret, the ethics investigation, fear and uncertainty. She thought about nights curled up together, mornings waking next to each other, the small everyday moments that had become their happiness. And she knew there was only one possible answer. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, of course, yes." Samara jumped to her feet and kissed her, deep and passionate, while tears ran freely down both their faces. When they separated, Samara slid the ring onto Pearl's finger. It fit perfectly. "It's turquoise," Samara explained. "Your birthstone. I had it specially made." Pearl looked at the ring, how it caught the light, how it felt solid and real on her finger. "It's perfect," she whispered. "You're perfect." "I'm not perfect," Samara laughed. "I'm a mess half the time." "Then you're my perfect mess," Pearl replied, kissing her again. That night, they called all their loved ones to share the news. Samara's sisters screamed with joy over the phone. Maya, Pearl's best friend, demanded to be the maid of honor. Dr. Morrison sent a formal but genuinely warm congratulations message. Even some nurses from SF General sent congratulatory messages. The wedding was planned for 6 months later, at a small ranch on the outskirts of Santa Fe. It would be intimate, just close family and friends, with an outdoor ceremony under the cottonwood trees. But before the wedding, there was something Pearl needed to do. One Saturday afternoon, she and Samara returned to San Francisco, specifically to SF General. Pearl had asked Dr. Morrison for special permission to visit the basement one last time. They went down to the area where the Rivera mural had been. The work now shone in its restored glory, protected behind special glass that controlled humidity and light. The colors were vibrant. The dynamic figures seemed to leap from the wall. It was one of the best restorations Pearl had done in her career. But it wasn't the mural she'd come to see. "This is the place where everything changed," Pearl said, looking around the basement. "Where I decided to stop running from the past and face it. Where I decided to fight for us." Samara took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "I was terrified of this place. It represented everything I'd done wrong, everything I'd hidden. But now," she looked at Pearl with a smile, "now it only represents the beginning of something beautiful. I want to come back here on our anniversary every year," Pearl said impulsively. "I want to remember where we came from. Not to stay trapped in the past, but to celebrate how much we've grown." "That seems perfect to me," Samara replied. Before leaving, Pearl touched the mural one last time, her fingers tracing the contours of the figures she'd restored so carefully. There was something poetic in that, she thought. She'd spent weeks restoring life to this forgotten art, discovering beauty under layers of damage and neglect. It was exactly what she and Samara had done for each other, like if you believe love can heal all wounds. The wedding was everything they'd dreamed of. The afternoon was perfect, with sun filtering through the cottonwood branches, filling the air with golden leaves falling like natural confetti. Pearl wore a white pantsuit with lace details, while Samara wore a simple ivory dress that made her look ethereal. There was no priest or judge, but a lay officiant who knew them personally and had helped write vows that reflected their unique journey. When it came time to exchange those vows, both were trembling. Pearl went first. "Samara, when I met you, I was in the darkest moment of my life, literally dying. And you, a stranger, decided my life was worth saving. You decided to risk everything for someone you didn't even know. That act of courage and love haunted me for 7 years, until fate brought us together again. Since then, you've been my anchor, my inspiration, my home. You've taught me that true love isn't perfect or easy. It's choosing someone every day, even when it's difficult. It's seeing all their imperfections and loving them more for it. It's building something beautiful from the ruins. Today, I choose to build the rest of my life with you. I promise to be by your side in good days and bad. I promise to celebrate your triumphs and hold you in your defeats. I promise to love you with the same fierceness with which you fought for me that night. And I promise that every day we spend together will be a testament to this second chance we were given." There were tears in everyone's eyes. Samara had to wipe her cheeks before she could speak. "Pearl," she began, her voice trembling, "the first time I saw you, something inside me recognized something inside you. I can't explain it rationally. But in that moment of chaos and fear, I knew I couldn't let you go. For 7 years, I thought it had just been the adrenaline of the moment. But when you came back, when our eyes met again, I knew the truth. It hadn't been chance. It had been destiny. You saved me as much as I saved you. You saved me from a life of fear and guilt. You showed me I could forgive myself, that I could choose happiness. You taught me to live, not just exist. Today, in front of all these people we love, I promise to be your partner in every sense of the word. I promise to care for your heart as carefully as I cared for your life that night. I promise to build a life with you that's worthy of the sacrifice we both made to be here. And I promise to love you until my last breath. And if there's something after that, I'll love you there too." When they exchanged rings and the officiant declared them married, the kiss they shared was witnessed by everyone who'd supported them on their impossible journey. And in that moment, under the New Mexico sky with cottonwood leaves falling around them, Pearl felt that everything had been worth it. Every moment of pain, every moment of fear, every difficult decision had led to this. The reception was joyful and chaotic. Samara's sisters told embarrassing stories from her childhood. Maya gave a hilarious speech about how Pearl had been impossible to love for years until she met Samara. Dr. Morrison attended and raised a toast to love that survives medical bureaucracy, which made everyone laugh. But the most significant moment came when one of the nurses from SF General, an older woman named Rosa, who'd been on duty that night 8 years ago, approached the couple. "I was there," Rosa said softly. "That night when you came in, Pearl. And I saw what Dr. Hayes did. We all saw. We didn't understand why she was so desperate to save you, why she was putting so much at risk. But now I understand. Love always knows, even when we don't." Samara hugged Rosa, crying openly now. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being there that night." "No," Rosa replied. "Thank you. For showing us it's worth fighting for what we love. For proving the system doesn't always have to win." When night fell and most guests had left, Pearl and Samara stayed on the ranch terrace watching the stars. They were exhausted but happy, holding hands with their rings shining under the moonlight. "What are you thinking about?" Samara asked. "About how everything makes sense now," Pearl replied. "That night at the hospital, that horrible accident, 7 years of unanswered questions, everything led to this, to us." "Do you believe in fate?" Samara asked. "I didn't," Pearl admitted. "But it's hard not to believe when I think about everything that had to happen for us to end up here. The odds were astronomical. And yet, here we are." "Here we are," Samara repeated, kissing her cheek. My wife," Pearl said, trying out the word, loving how it sounded. "Sounds good, doesn't it? Sounds perfect." They stayed there until the night's cold forced them inside. But before doing so, Pearl looked up at the starry sky and whispered a silent thank you to whatever had conspired to bring Samara into her life, to the impossible decisions they'd both made, to the courage to love even when it seemed impossible. The following years were a mix of ordinary and extraordinary. Pearl continued restoring art throughout the Southwest, becoming increasingly recognized in her field. Samara built the Santa Fe Clinic into a respected institution, serving underserved populations with the same dedication she'd brought to SF General. They bought a small adobe house on the outskirts of Santa Fe, with a garden where Samara grew medicinal herbs, and Pearl had a studio to work. They adopted a street dog they named Rivera, in honor of the mural that had brought them together. They traveled when they could, sometimes to tropical beaches, other times to colonial cities full of art waiting to be restored. There were challenges, of course. Arguments about money, about time, about the balance between their demanding careers and their relationship. There were nights when the past came back to haunt them, when old demons knocked at the door. There were moments of doubt, moments of frustration, moments when love didn't feel like enough. But they always found their way back to each other. They always remembered why they'd fought so hard to be together. 5 years after their wedding, Pearl received the greatest honor of her career. She was selected to direct the restoration of murals at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. It was the project of her lifetime, something that would define her legacy. The night she received the news, Samara opened a bottle of champagne they'd been saving for a special occasion. "To you," Samara toasted, to your talent, your dedication, and your passion for preserving beauty. To us, Pearl corrected. None of this would have been possible without you. Always us, Samara agreed, clinking their glasses. But there was something else Samara wanted to discuss. Something she'd been considering for months. I've been thinking, she began cautiously, about expanding our family. Pearl set down her glass slowly. You mean adoption, Samara said quickly. I know we've never really talked about having children, and if it's not something you want, that's okay. But I've been working with so many kids at the clinic, kids who need stable homes, and I keep thinking, we could be good mothers. Together. Pearl considered this. She'd never imagined herself as a mother. Her life had always revolved around her work, her art. But as she looked at Samara, this woman who'd dedicated herself to caring for others, who'd spent her entire life healing, she could imagine something different. She could imagine a house full of laughter, of scattered toys, of love multiplied. Do you think we're ready? Pearl asked. You're never completely ready, Samara replied. But I think we have something important to offer. We know what it's like to survive the impossible. We know what it's like to fight for what you love. We could teach that to a child who needs it. Then let's do it, Pearl said, feeling a new emotion bubbling in her chest. Let's start the process. The adoption journey was long and sometimes frustrating. There were endless papers, interviews, home evaluations. There were moments when they questioned if they were doing the right thing. But finally, 18 months after starting the process, they received the call. There was a girl, 5 years old. Her mother had died in an accident. She had no other family. She needed a home. Would they be interested in meeting her? They met her a week later at an adoption center in Santa Fe. Her name was Sophia. She had dark hair and pigtails, and big eyes that had seen too much for her short age. She was shy, hiding behind the social worker, but when Pearl showed her photos of the mural she was restoring, something in Sophia's expression softened. You made that? She asked in a small voice. I'm fixing it, Pearl explained. Someone else painted it a long time ago, but it got damaged. My job is to make it look beautiful again. Like fixing broken things, Sophia said, and there was something in her voice that suggested she understood more than her 5 years should. Exactly, Pearl replied, feeling her heart expand. Samara knelt to be at Sophia's level. I'm a doctor, she said gently. My job is to help people feel better when they're sick or hurt. Can you fix broken hearts? Sophia asked. The question hit Samara like lightning. She looked at Pearl over the girl's head, and in that silent exchange, they both knew. This was their daughter. Somehow, against all odds, the universe had given them a second chance in another form. Yes, Samara replied, her voice full of emotion. I can help with that. But it takes time and a lot of love. Do you have a lot of love? Sophia asked. Yes, Pearl and Samara answered in unison. We have a lot. Sophia moved in with them 3 months later, bringing a small suitcase with all her belongings and a battered teddy bear named Oso. The first months were challenging. Sophia had nightmares, emotional outbursts, moments where she constantly tested boundaries. But Pearl and Samara were patient. They understood trauma. They understood loss. They knew what it was like to need time to heal. And slowly, incredibly, Sophia began to flourish. She learned she could paint in Pearl's studio whenever she wanted. She learned that Samara always had time for a hug, no matter how busy she was. She learned that love wasn't conditional, that it didn't leave just because you had a bad day. And Pearl and Samara learned too. They learned about parenting, about the balance between discipline and understanding. They learned to laugh more, to worry less about small things. They learned that love could grow and multiply in ways they'd never imagined. A year after Sophia moved in with them, they had a small celebration in the garden. It was the anniversary of their family gotcha day, as they called it. Sophia had insisted on making a cake herself, which turned out to be a glorious mess of melted chocolate and uneven frosting. "It's perfect," Pearl said, cutting a generous slice. "It's terrible," Sophia laughed, but her eyes shone with pride. "But I made it all by myself." "That's what makes it special," Samara said, kissing the top of her head. "Things we make with love are always special, even if they're not perfect." That night, after Sophia fell asleep, Pearl and Samara sat on the back porch, watching fireflies dance in the garden. "Did you ever imagine this?" Samara asked. "When we were in that basement 8 years ago, fighting with the past, did you imagine we'd end up here? Married, with a daughter, living in Santa Fe?" "Never," Pearl admitted. "But it's better than I could have imagined. It's real. It's complicated. It's beautiful." "Like us," Samara said, taking her hand. "Like us," Pearl agreed. The years continued passing. Sophia grew, developing a love for art like Pearl, and a compassion for others like Samara. Pearl completed the restoration at the National Cathedral, gaining international recognition. Samara published a study on community medicine that influenced public health policies. Their family grew with the adoption of a second child, a boy named Matteo, who needed as much love as Sophia once had. And through it all, Pearl and Samara maintained their tradition. Every year, on their wedding anniversary, they returned to SF General. They went down to the basement, now converted into a small museum exhibiting the restored Rivera mural, and remembered where they'd come from. They remembered the scared woman on a stretcher and the terrified doctor who couldn't let her go. They remembered the lies they'd been forced to tell, the secrets they'd kept, the impossible choices they'd made. But more than anything, they remembered the love that had been born at the worst possible moment and had survived everything. The love that had transformed them from strangers to life partners. On their 10th wedding anniversary, standing in front of the mural in the basement that had once brought them together, Pearl looked at Samara and saw laugh lines around her eyes, silver strands in her hair, the marks of a life well lived. "Do you regret anything?" Pearl asked. Samara seriously considered the question before responding. "I regret the things that were outside my control. I regret that the system was corrupt, that Dr. Green hurt people. I regret the years we spent apart. But my decisions, the choices I made to bring you back, to protect you, to love you, no, not a second of regret." "Me neither," Pearl said. "I'd do it all again. Every difficult moment, every sacrifice. Everything was worth it to get here." They kissed in front of the mural, surrounded by art Pearl had saved and memories they'd both transformed. And in that kiss was a renewed promise that no matter what came, no matter what challenges they faced, they'd face them together. Because that's what loving meant. It wasn't the absence of fear or pain. It was the choice to stay, to fight, to build something beautiful from the ashes of what had been broken. It was choosing again and again the person who'd chosen you when no one else had. It was believing, even in the darkest moments, that love was enough. And for Pearl and Samara, it had been. Against all odds, despite all obstacles, through all storms, their love had been more than enough. It had been everything. If you want the continuation of this story, write it in the comments, because that's the only way I'll know what you want. And don't forget that YouTube only prioritizes subscribers. So subscribe now, so you don't miss the next story that will make you believe in love and second chances. This is just the beginning.